Good morning and welcome to the August Emergency Preparedness and Response Lunch and Learn. Today's topic is Public Health Emergency Preparedness Capability 4, Emergency Public Information and Warning. The presenter is Brookie Crawford, Risk Communications Manager, Office of Communications. Over to you, Brookie.
Thank you. We picked a very good time, given that there's a tropical storm breathing down our necks to talk about this. You can go ahead and go to the next slide. When we talk about public information, what we're talking about is getting the right information to the right people at the right time so that they can make the right decisions. So it's very important that we share information so people can make the decisions. And there's an action item in there, and we'll talk a little bit about that later. Next slide. There are six key principles. We want to be first, we want to be right, we want to be credible, we want to express empathy. A lot of times when we're talking about public information, it's at a time when people are very stressed, either because of a fatality, an illness, or otherwise, and we want to make sure we encompass that in our messaging. We want to promote action, tell them what to do. People feel better if they're empowered, and we want to show respect, and that can include making sure that we're including everybody, accessibility needs, bilingual, all of that in there as well. The key here is that it's not just one of these. We can't just be first, because if we're just first and we're not right, it doesn't help our message. And it can't be right, but 3 days too late don't help us at all. So it has to be all six working together. Next slide. So we're going to talk about developing your emergency information plan. The first step is going to be to define your audience. Next slide. So it's important that you understand your community. Know the demographics. What kind of age ranges do you have? What kind of backgrounds do you have? Are you rural? Are you urban? Are they educated or are they low income? You know, whatever your choices are. Also need to know about any accessibility needs. Do you have a lot of hearing impaired or visually impaired? Do you have a lot of people with language barriers? Do you have a lot of people that may not have access to TV or newspapers? Think about all of those demographics when you're planning your plan. And then you need to define the audience for each message. So the audience for message 1 may not be the audience for another event. So hurricane is pretty broad. We're hitting everybody. But if we have a boil water notice in a certain community, that's a very specific audience. So sometimes it's the general public. Sometimes it's clinicians. Maybe we have a infectious disease out there and we want the clinicians to be aware so that they can start narrowing in and spotting it. Or sometimes it's a subset of the community, like in a boil water notice or a PHEP, you know, people that ate at the certain restaurant. Lake Anna is another good example. We were only targeting people that visited Lake Anna during that STEC outbreak. Next slide. Once you know your audience, then you want to talk about the median for delivering your message. And it's important that you define your audience first, because different audiences might be more receptive to different mediums. Next slide. And here's just a list of different ways that you can get your message out. It's not always about talking to the media, although a news release is the simplest, but sometimes there are other ways, especially if the message doesn't need to go out to a broad audience. A boil water notice in a certain subdivision is a very good example. We don't need a news release. We don't want to panic everybody in the whole city about a boil water notice when it's only just one little community. But definitely news releases. Do we want it to be just at the local level? Is it a regional thing? Is it a statewide thing? We can have actual media interviews. Usually the purpose of a news release is to get the media to come back and ask more questions. So you'll have interviews. Statement. Sometimes we don't know all the facts already, but we need to get a statement out that says, hey, we're working on this. We're aware of this issue, and we'll be coming forth with more information as we gain it. That's a nice statement. We got out there, we got some information, and we let the people know we're working on it. It's very reassuring if the public knows that we're aware of something and we're working on it. News conferences and satellite media tours are a great way to get information to a lot of people, the same information to a lot of people. Op-eds, probably not as useful in an emergency, but they are a possibility. Social media is huge right now. It's a great way. You can have blogs, you can use your website, newsletter if you have a standard group of people that you communicate with. Sometimes, like in the hurricane here, we might have power outage and the traditional mediums might not be available. So posting flyers at community centers and things like that, community meetings, town halls are also a great way. There's a variety of ways that you can use, and they're not limited to these. So you just have to brainstorm and see what else works best for you. Next slide. Next, you want to actually develop your message. And sometimes you can develop at least a template ahead of time. For instance, rabies. There's a rabid snake or, sorry, rabid skunk in the neighborhood, and that we've had to alert people. That's something you can do a nice template for ahead of time and then just fill in the key information. So you can do some of this ahead of time. And other times you have an event that you didn't think that you would have, like the South Hill fire and all that encompassed. So you have to develop those on the fly. Next slide. You want your message to be simple. You want it to be timely. You want it to be accurate. You want it to be relevant, credible, and consistent. So simple, in general, we tell people at least like a fourth grade reading level. It doesn't even matter how educated they are. When people are stressed, it's harder for them to understand things. So if you could keep it as simple as possible, obviously timely. Telling you about a hurricane in April doesn't really help you, but telling one about this week is going to be a lot more useful. Accurate, we want to make sure we're always giving accurate information. And it can be currently, this is what we know, or at this time, because that's accurate as we can get at this time. Relevant, again, we're talking about hurricanes. So relevant things might be flooding and, sheltering and, emergency kits. Telling you to get your flu shot may not be quite as relevant right now. Credible, obviously, people are only going to listen to us if they feel that we're a credible source. And you want to be consistent. You want to be saying the same message over and over. You want to define your key messages and keep repeating them. Next slide. And there we're talking about the key messages. What is it that your audience needs to know? We're all experts in our field and we know a lot of information about that, but what is it that the audience needs to know? Like a meteorologist can tell you the history of a hurricane, but right now, is that what we need to know? No, we need to know how to stay safe. So what is it that your audience needs to know, and to try and narrow it down to those top 3 items. You can have 4 sometimes or 2, but 3 is a nice good number. People tend to remember things in 3. So what are those top 3? And then you want to anticipate what kind of questions people would have. Who, what, when, where, why? What's happening? What do I need to know? Where is it happening? Why? And then again, we talk about that action item. You want to give them something to do. People feel empowered when they have something to do, and then you can tell that your message was received. Do you want them to go to a website? Do you want them to call a call center? Do you want them to get an emergency kit? Do you want them to shelter in place? Do you want them to call their doctor? Just make sure that you're defining that in your message. Other cool, useful things besides just your message is a message map, which if you take one of our spokesperson's classes, we will tell you how to prepare one of those. And then you can also do FAQs and talking points. Even if you send out a press release, it's really nice to have those FAQs right there, because sometimes you can't put everything in a press release, but then you have that nice information there that if you get follow-up questions that anybody can answer. Just a couple incidents recently, the South Hill fire, we had talking points and FAQs, the Lake Anna Aztec outbreak, the James River swimming advisory. Those are all events recently where we used FAQs that we prepared simultaneously when we were doing the news release. And then we were able to give those out to all of our partners in that event. And that way everybody was on the same page, that consistency when we answered questions. So those are great, useful tools. Next slide. And the last is establish your approval process. So it shouldn't just be like, oh, there's a hurricane, let me just start sending out information. There should be a plan on who's preparing it, how it's getting approved. Next slide. Yeah, so you want to define who's going to develop your messages. If you have a designated PIO in your local health district, that should be the person. A lot of times it's your pop health person. Sometimes it's your emergency coordinator. Define who's going to develop that message, who's going to review that message. It's always good to have at least one other pair of eyes on something before you send it out. Please include your regional PIOs on this. We're great for that. We can help think about things that because we're outside that box and can think of the big picture. If you're partnering with other people, some of these big events like South Hill, we worked with DEQ. We even had to partner in with North Carolina because the waterways that we were talking about started to run into North Carolina, so that everybody's on the same page with your message. And then lastly, you need to know who has to approve this. At the local level, it's probably your health district. If you're a central office, it's probably your department head. It may even need to go up to Dr. Shelton. And for some statewide releases, we have to go to the secretary's office and they approve them. So make sure you know who has to approve the message before you get it sent out. Next slide. And then lastly, you have to establish an update schedule. Next slide. So is this a one and done kind of message? I send out my hurricane preparedness and maybe I'm done, but I might want to have a follow-up. So, I have a before the hurricane hits, be prepared, what to do during the hurricane I send out, and then what to do after the hurricane, food safety, what to do if your power is out, things like that. So you need to decide of your message. Is it a long-term event like South Hill? We were, checking in every 24 hours to determine if there was new messaging we need to send. So you need to kind of decide, is this something that's going to be longer term, and what kind of schedule are we going to send out new messages, especially in evolving events. This is really important. And then you want to think about, is this a big enough event that we're setting up an incident command? Do we need a joint information center or a joint information team? Those are all very useful people that can help develop the messaging, the facts, the talking points, the message map. A couple of these events we've set up in incident web pages so that the public can go to. The call center has been a part of those things. So think about what kind of partnerships you're going to need to keep up the messaging in an emergency. Next slide. And then that's great that we've had an emergency plan, but you also want to think about your sunny day messaging when there's not an emergency. This is a great time to build relationships. You can do that by sharing messages during non-emergencies about awareness, prevention, preparedness. It helps you build credibility and establish relationships with your partners in the community, with the media, with other people that will be helpful in an emergency to share those emergency messages. Next slide. And then we have regional PIOs and we can help you. Out of OCOM, we're the first line of support. We can definitely help with interview opportunities, finding the right person. We can narrow down a reporter's agenda for you. Sometimes it's a beat reporter and they're just doing a story and they've heard that, oh, there's a hurricane coming and, can you tell me about it? So this is where you can, a PIO can help focus. Hey, do you want to talk to them about flooding and the potential flooding or septic and pumps and wells are a big issue when it floods. Maybe that's your article. We can help that and help them improve their story focus. We can also help in preparing you. We are trained to look at the big pictures. We can address controversial issues. We can keep that message consistent. Next slide. Here's some training that we offer. Spokesperson, we ask that if you are going to be talking to the media, and there should be somebody talking to a media in the emergency, that you get spokesperson training ahead of time. We're developing a risk communications training that we're going to be getting out this year to help specifically with these kind of emergency communications. We have a plain language for public health course going on right now. And if you haven't gone to the Comms Hub, we'll get Donald to send out that link for you. But that's where we list all our communications trainings to help you out. Next slide. This is my contact information. I'm the risk communications manager, but I also am one of the regional PIOs, and I'm actually 3 right now because we have a couple vacancies. And the other one is in Southwest Virginia, and she is Linda Scarborough, but either one of us can help you. I also have a full list of all the OCOM staff because we have a social media person, we have a website person, we have design people that can help you with all your needs. And there is the intranet page with a lot of resources as well. And next slide, I think it's just questions now. Anybody
Feel
have
free.
questions?
Anyone can unmute themselves and ask any questions, so feel free to do so.
You're all just too busy preparing for hurricanes, right?
I've checked the chat and there's no questions, although Linda did comment, great job, rookie.
Thank you. And sometimes it's hard to think about these things until you're actually in the middle of it. And if you are, Linda and I are both great resources. Bring us in early and we'll help as much as we can.
Well, hearing no questions, I guess we'll conclude here. And again, thanks, Brookie, for the presentation. And everyone, you'll be getting the PowerPoint presentation that Brookie delivered in an email here shortly. And again, thanks for your participation.
Thank you all. Stay safe.